Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Clark, and I am delighted to have you here today on part of ZHorse, where they make GRC easy. This is a series of risk insight webinars that we are doing, and I am super delighted to have our guest today. Amanda Jo Erven, or Jo, is with us, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her. Then I'm going to have her tell you about herself. I actually ran across Jo in LinkedIn. I saw she was working in a part of the industry that doesn't get a lot of attention, and I was fascinated. So I kind of connected with her. I read her book, and I'm going to show you the book because I love it. It's right here. It's Becoming the Everyday Ethicist. I've read it twice, actually, but don't tell Jo, okay? Don't tell Jo. I've read it twice. I love the book. If anybody in management or risk management, or just if you're in life and you want to understand a little bit more about ethics, read the book, okay? It's a great book. But she's an author, she's a trainer, she's a conversationalist, she's an educator, she does all sorts of stuff. Amanda Jo, thank you so much for being here. Would you mind just enlightening us just a little bit about the many things that you do?
I love it. Thanks for the awesome intro, Dan. I'm like, ooh, this is fun. And for the book plug, by the way, I love that. Again, Amanda Jo Erven. I go by Jo, my middle name. There was too many Amandas growing up. I am from the South, so hence the two name thing, Amanda Jo. But my company is really what I do. It's called Audit Consulting Education LLC. I call it ACE for short, that first letter. But then my son says, hey, Mom, why did you name your company after a hardware store when I say ACE? So that's the running joke in my family. But that's really the three things I do. Audit, I pride myself on still being a practitioner, not just teaching internal audit, but also doing the work. And so I call myself an internal audit strategist. I have several clients here around the Denver, Colorado area, which is where I am. My second wing kind of spins off from that. Consulting, I do just about anything from helping implement audit software to designing and implementing control programs at companies, to most recently ethics and culture consulting, which I'm sure we're going to get into today. And then education is my favorite piece of my business. So exactly what you said. I love just having these conversations. I love writing, researching, teaching. I'm teaching a new class at higher ed at a brand new university this semester. So
wow.
Exciting. Yep. I've taught about 5 or 6 different classes. So this one adds a new one to the list. But yeah, I've always loved the teaching part of our jobs. And so I've really tried to embrace that. So that's my favorite part.
I should have met you when I was a CAE, because I would have had you come over, help to train my staff a little bit, but it's too late for that. But now we're going to get the word out to a lot of people.
All right. Well, I appreciate that.
So I'm excited about that. I understand too that you also, besides the book of Becoming the Everyday Ethicist, you also wrote a book about ethics in auditing. I can't remember the title.
Well, really, my book writing career started with total quality auditing.
There we go.
Yep. TQA, what I call it, was really based on my research and studies of TQM. So everybody listening might remember total quality management, pretty popular topic over the decades. And when I studied TQM, it's on the CIA exam. I taught it in Intro to Business. What clicked for me was this aha moment of all of these successful proven principles used in TQM can be used by us as auditors. And so I kind of shifted, I trademarked TQA, and really I teach it a lot. I'm in my 4th year of doing a monthly webinar series on it, have more people on in 2022 than ever before. So I'm really excited that it's caught on. But you are exactly right that that's where my focus on ethics started, because the first point in TQA is all about ethics. How can we audit management, audit culture, really get behind those ethics policies and make sure they're in place. And so getting us back to the basics as an auditor on looking at what's foundational within an organization. So it did start with writing that book almost 4 years ago now. So for me.
Excellent. Yeah, I would have, if I had known, I would have had that book in my audit team staff library, but I didn't, but I do today. So I really am excited for our conversation. As you know, I'm working with we're with ZHorse. They are a GRC company. They have a software for GRC. The reason I love ZHorse is because the CEO, Alvaro Trujillo, has a really unique view on business. I love his view, and I don't find many people have that view. He is a very ethical person.
Oh,
He and I were chatting a little bit about ethics, and I thought in my mind, a little light bulb went off and said, wow, I need to get Amanda Joe to kind of talk to us. I'm going to send this, make sure he sees this. And it just aligned so well what he's doing. But then I started thinking, to be honest with you, I wasn't sure how we link ethics and understanding of ethics and managing and auditing and reviewing ethics into GRC or into risk management. So we're going to explore that a little bit today, but I want to start with your book,
okay.
Becoming the Everyday Ethicist. I enjoyed reading it. I'll be honest. It's something that I think we all inherently want to be ethical in what we do. At times, the situations may not allow us to be as ethical as we would like. And over history or over time, the definition of being ethical has changed. And obviously in the industry, it changes. There's industries that used to be used car salesmen. Now I think it's politicians. We always question their ethics. So I wanted to know, what in the world caused you to write the book? I mean, were you just sitting around one day saying, I got nothing to do? Or were you, what caused it? What was the brainstorm that said, I need to do this?
Well, I think I kind of alluded to it already. I started with thinking back about my internal audit career. I left 4 years ago. I was the director of internal audit, big company. I may or may not have left because of an ethical dilemma. So that kind of always sparks your brain thinking. But, you know, one thing we implemented before I left was this idea of auditing culture and ethics. And it really brought me, it grounded me in, you know, this is the fundamentals of an organization. And just kind of going back to, how do we audit culture? You know, how do we do it on the micro level within our audit engagements? How do we do it at a macro level, at a higher level? And hopefully we get into some of this, some of the tools that I use, like surveys, culture and risk surveys. But, you know, it really just, writing about TQA first and having that first part being about ethics, I'd say is my number one reason I wrote an ethics book. My number two reason was my second book is all about our personal development choices. It's called Your Road, Your Choices. And of course, I have an entire chapter dedicated to our character choices. And that's where my 3 character choices came from that I teach about. And just real briefly, I know we might talk about them, we might not get to that, but the 3 character choices I think we all have in life are, number 1, the big me, which is the phenomenon that we might be seeing more in society today, this more self-interest, personal gain mentality. The second character choice is the ethical rationalizer, which is really what you alluded to. None of us are as ethical as we think we are. And so kind of dissecting, what are our blind spots to our ethics. And then of course, the third ethical choice was the everyday ethicist. And that one chapter in my second book led to the whole book on becoming the everyday ethicist. So, you know, I'd say it wasn't an overnight thing. It was a progression of, you know, ethics kind of went into audit, ethics went into my personal life. And then how can I just really develop that into its own concept, which, you know, becoming the everyday ethicist has really 4 parts: personal ethics, leadership ethics, organizational ethics. And then I end with really, how can we audit ethics? So there's a bonus chapter in the book called Total Ethical Auditing, where I go into, much like what you were saying, how can we build the risk assessments around ethics? And so hopefully we can get into some of that, but that was a long answer to your question. Sorry.
That was a great answer though, because it opens the door for so many other things to explore. And you know, we have some questions that we were going to talk about, and we may get to those, but I want to deviate a little bit now, because it's your fault. You caused it. You just have so many interesting things. I want to go straight to, you've got the 4 different categories of ethics
Mhm.
How do we, and maybe we start with audit and then kind of grow into risk management, because audit and risk are two different things in my mind. They
Mhm.
are related like cousins, but they aren't the same thing.
Right.
Um, so it's hard to audit ethics.
Mhm.
So maybe you could share with us just a little bit on auditing ethics and how one might go about that. And then we translate strictly to risk management. How do we adopt ethical understanding to a risk management process that really allows us to kind of push the envelope?
Yes.
That to me seems to be a little bit hard, but it seems to me to be very important.
Yes, I would agree with that. Here's what I say. I have kind of steps in the book. And
Uh-huh.
the first step, and I think you will appreciate this because we love risk assessments as auditors, right? We do a lot of those. I say let's start by, really narrowing our focus to things that could be ethical challenges within our organization. So I say the very first step is identify what I call your ethical risk categories. And in the book, in that bonus chapter, I talk about 8 kind of general ethical risk categories that can be out there. And here's some examples for you.
Uh-huh.
Disingenuous leadership, that can be an
Yep.
ethical risk. Incentive
Yep.
plans, structures can be an ethical risk. Things around technology, we could go into lots of different categories there. I think you probably remember in the book, I take technology even and,
Yep.
break it into 8 different parts. But the point is brainstorm with your team, what could be issues around, or bring about issues around ethics. One of mine is the board, because we have seen, look at the headlines. Where have
Yep.
companies gotten in trouble? Use hindsight as a tool, break down where their ethical risk was. A lot of these companies, that the risk was with the board. The board didn't have the right composition, the right knowledge, the right skill set to be on the board. Your board can be an ethical risk. So, really just come up with what could it be for your organization. That to me is step one.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you a concrete starting point. From there, you can go in a number of different ways. What I do in the book is break down different risk assessments that you can do
Uh-huh.
on each of those ethical risk categories. So, do a fraud triangle assessment is what I call it. Say, what is the opportunity for this risk to happen? What would the rationalizations be? What are the pressures or the incentives? Give it a score. And you can do that for each one of these ethical risks. And then it gives you the ability to prioritize. If it comes up that incentives are a huge area, could be a big problem, man, that better go to the top of your, I'm going to say audit plan, because that's what most
Yep.
people call it, but that should go to the top of your list. So I guess long answer short, I would say think of ethical risks as something you can risk assess just like any other area in your company. Don't overcomplicate it. I think the issue is people think ethics is too hard to assess, but if you break it down to concrete things, then you have an easier time to assess that. So that's my suggestion there.
And that's great advice, because as you were saying that, I was thinking I was in one company and they called me into the office. CEO called me in the office and he was questioning a rating on an audit report.
Mhm.
And you know how they do that, and they want to push and give you some pressure. And they put a lot of pressure, and that's where I drew the line. The report is mine, the rating's mine. So I just said no,
Mhm.
and no, and no again. So that made me thinking while you were saying that, some instances are really clear. They're really cut clear. You've already put drawn the line in the sand and said, I'm not going to cross that line.
Mhm.
But then I was thinking too, when I was in risk management, there were lines that I may have crossed. I don't think they were ethical, but they were more flexible.
Mm.
Or as you say, I could rationalize my reason for doing it.
Right. Yeah,
Is
I think that's, you just brought up such a good point that people don't think the data around ethics is quantifiable. But
Mhm.
could you not say this same leader has asked me to change a rating, to take something out of a report 10 times over the last 3 years? And is that not a data point then to say, to bring to the board, this is an issue? And, and there is some underlying red flag here. And I think that's where I want to get auditors to stop thinking of ethics as such a soft thing. This is really something we can put data behind for our boards and et cetera. Who else needs it? So,
that's fascinating, because I had never thought about that, but you're absolutely right. If they ask you 5, 6, 7 times, that's a data point.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Everything is a data point. Yeah.
We're not sure exactly what it says, but it's certainly an indicator.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's something that you can actually incorporate into GRC, the mentality, or in the software, that's a data point we're going to track. That's something that we're going to follow up on, et cetera. Because there is a difference between pressure and over pressure in that kind of thing. I could talk to you all day, but we don't have all day. So we're going to go into some more questions, talk a little bit more about that. I always am intrigued by how we communicate ethical concerns to either senior management or to the board. Right. And I know we have, as your example about the data points, we could certainly have data points say, I'm concerned. I've always had kind of that weird look of, hey, I want to talk to you about something ethical. And I go, ethical? What? Have you run across any ways of communicating to the board about these kind of concerns so that we don't feel like we're alienating ourselves or pushing ourselves outside of the family, if you will?
Sure. So one of my favorite statistics to share within my presentations is that there was a survey done a couple of years ago that said about 2/3 of every board says that culture and ethics is their number one priority, or on their top 3 priorities. I think that was the way it was put. However, almost the exact same percentage, it's like 62% also admits never spending any time on it. And what was kind of my aha moment is that statistic alone should be presented to boards, to say, this is why we're doing this, because this matters to you, but you admitted to not spending any time of it. And I want to connect the dots there. I want our function, whether that's audit or risk, to start bringing culture data to the table for you, because I think you care about it. And I bet you'll get some reaction to that. I know personally, I love to ask the question, we do polling questions now, right? In our virtual world, what makes an organization successful? Very simple question. I give them 3 options. Number 1, finances or revenue, profit. Number 2, product, strategy, service that we deliver. Number 3, ethics, culture, people, leaders. Everyone answers number 3. Auditors don't spend enough time on number 3. And I think, just again, bring it back to the data. This is what makes a world-class organization. This is what the successful Fortune 500 companies that are still on the Fortune 500, they have the ethics and the culture that everybody wants. And that's the most important factor for success. So we need to spend some time looking at it. And I hope that that will win over management. I hope that will win over the board, because I'm all about explaining the why. Why are we doing this? We aren't doing this to point fingers at you. We are not doing this to be the bad cop. We are doing this to be the crossing guard, to help you get from point A to point B, where you need to be when it comes to becoming a world-class organization. And so I think, the more you can kind of just conceptualize it, say those words, we're not there to catch you, we're there to make you better. And hopefully that will help you. If you've got that rapport, hopefully it will get you there.
I love that, the crossing guard metaphor. I like that a lot. It's interesting, because you're actually helping and assisting get from one place to another.
Yes, that's one of my favorites to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I like that. You're brilliant. You're brilliant. Joe, you're brilliant.
I'm gonna talk to you every day. You're just gonna boost my self-esteem.
So as we're talking here, I'm getting the idea that I try to conceptualize and put things into categories so that it's easier to educate and for people to assimilate. And so when I'm talking about GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, I don't see a lot in well, that's going to sound bad. So let me rephrase that. There is ethics in compliance, but it's hard. It's harder to be unethical because the rules are pretty clear. And
Mhm.
either you comply or you don't, or you're an attorney and you really exploit it. One of the two. Okay.
Yes.
And risk, I can see there's a wide gray area in risk management because you want to take advantage of opportunities. You don't want to put us in a bad position, etc.
Mhm.
Governance is kind of, to me, is where it all starts.
Yes.
Tone at the top,
Yes.
and where we as risk managers or auditors or people like you and I who are helping management understand these concepts better, that might be where I would start. I don't know. Out of the three, what's your thought? Governance, risk, and compliance.
I would 100% agree. I mean, governance to me, one of your biggest critical parts of governance is your ethics policy, your mission. First of all, let's go back even your mission statement, your values, you know, that you have on the wall. They better include something around ethics and integrity. So, I mean, this is kind of going back to the basics of when you were forming your organization. Where did that come into play? And I bet for most organizations, I can think of one that maybe doesn't. We can talk about that if you want, but ethics and integrity have been foundational to building the business. And so, of course, I mean, that's governance. That is, you know, back to the basics. So, you know, after mission, values, you think about those standards of conduct. That's actually in total quality auditing. Back to the basics. What are those acceptable boundaries of behaviors within our organization? And why are we as auditors not looking at those? That's important to organizational success. I feel like as auditors, a lot of times we just kind of jump to the end. We jump to, you know, the product, the strategy, whatever it is. We need to get back to those objectives, those, you know, those underlying, why are we doing things this way? And start questioning those when we need to. So anyway, yes, I completely agree. It's governance. It's that standards of conduct. It's your ethics policy. And then of course it's taking it the steps further. It's not just having it, it's communicating it. It's holding people accountable for it. But all of that is part of governance.
You know, it's funny that you say that about the auditors. I was Krabby Auditor was my website, krabbyauditor.com. And I'm the rebellious auditor. I question things. I love to question. I point out the weaknesses in risk assessments that everybody uses for years. I do stuff like that. And I just question ourselves. It endears me to myself, but it doesn't endear other people to me.
But that's why you and I get along. So
that's right. That's right. But your comment, I'm going to ask you kind of a tough question here. Do you think that auditors are capable of auditing ethics?
Yes.
Okay.
I do. I think they've got to have the grit. They've got to have the courage. You know, I write a lot about that. The gritty auditor, the courageous auditor. These are all parts of, to me, what total ethical auditing means. And let's talk about that real quick. Sure. What does that term mean to me? I broke it into several parts in the book. Number one, we need to think and plan like a fraud examiner. You know, where are the potential ethical risks? One of the major questions I always get is what's the difference between ethics and fraud? You kind of teach on both, all your trainings talk about both. I love that question, by the way. And here's what I say. Every fraud is unethical. I haven't had one person argue with me about that yet. Every fraud is unethical, but not all unethical behavior is fraud yet. And this is our opportunity as auditors to start where it could start with that unethical behavior and start influencing behavior. And I think let me put it this way too, there is so much more opportunity for auditors to get involved in ethics preventatively, proactively, versus come back and audit it afterwards too. I think that we could get involved in training on ethics within our organization. But when it comes to auditing, build it into every single one of your engagements. I have a micro level kind of culture questionnaire, has questions around 4 different categories. You already mentioned one of them, tone from the top. Another is accountability. Third one is communication and challenge. What does that look like within the area? And incentives. Those are kind of the 4 risk culture questions that you can start building into every single engagement that you do. You can do interviews, you can do surveys, you can do anonymous surveys, which is going to get great information from that area you're auditing. But you can audit culture. And honestly, that's one of my favorite training programs I give, because people don't think you can. And, I think hopefully by the end of it, I prove that wrong. There is definitely ways, but do you have to be courageous? Absolutely. Because this is a topic that is scary to management. However, if they tell you you can't audit culture, that's a red flag to begin with. So.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I've been lucky. I've had most of my career in corporate America. I was with companies that were very open, and I would have to explain some things to people who didn't know that, we transitioned from traditional to risk-based auditing. And when we got into risk, I'd have to educate my clients about what that meant. And I was very lucky. They were educated, they were open. They wanted just to understand. And I always felt they wanted to understand. They didn't want to criticize us. My audit team always felt they wanted to criticize us. So I educated them and said, no, they just want to understand. Our job is to educate. This is an area where I think that we as auditors, to be courageous, we are going to have to take the role of educator to boards and to senior management at times around ethics and culture.
Yes.
So that's going to be a challenge for us.
I love what you just said, because I recently had a great conversation with an auditor who needed, I've told everybody recently, I want them to get one word out of their audit language. You want to know what that word is?
Yes, tell me.
It's coverage. Because the traditional, and you'll agree with this, the traditional mentality of management and some audit committees out there and boards is that we need to get coverage of the entire organization. And I think that is some crazy, arbitrary, made up term that needs to be thrown out of auditors' vocabulary, because what we need to be doing is focusing on the risks. And what I think is a huge part of risks today are ethical risks. And so, it's educating these traditional audit committees, boards, managements that say, no, we don't need to get coverage. We need to worry about what you're worrying about. And I think culture is something they're worried about. They may not want to admit it, but they are. So we've got to add that to the list.
You would be a great Mrs. Krabby auditor. That sounds like something I would have said.
I love it.
It's kind of funny. I had one, I'll tell you an interesting story. I was talking to the president of the bank, and he was complaining a little bit about the culture changing in the organization, because it was a family run organization. They were real happy. They trusted, they created an environment where your employees were great. It was a great company. I had no problem with their ethics because the two leaders were outstanding. But he says, I'm worried about the culture change. And he explained that it was going to change. And I said, the funny thing is, Bill, I'm going to fake name, said, Bill, the funny thing is, every time your employees go to a training class, the culture changes just a little bit. Every time you hire someone new, your culture changes just a little bit. So I'm not sure you're concerned about the culture changing. I think you're more concerned about it getting too far away from where you want it to be. And that's a different perspective.
Right.
When it comes to ethics, how do you feel about that statement, that culture, it's going to change? Should we be focused on that change, or should we be mired to, I want to bring these new people and these new thoughts into my old way of thinking, or is there an accommodation to move forward?
Wow, now that was a hard question. Your last one was
good.
This was a hard question. I 100% have never thought of it that way. However, I mean, I love quotes. My book is full of quotes. I love David Brooks. There was one that he had, and I wish I could remember it word for word, about how, it's not the good environments you need to worry about. It is the bad ones that change the good people, something like that. And I know that's not exactly what we're talking about, but it was getting me thinking about how, not only do people change cultures change people.
Yes.
Yep. And that, that kind of, when I read that out of him or from him, I was like, how true is that? Kind of back to what you're talking about. I think the number one thing that is lacking in a lot of organizations is ethics and integrity questions in hiring. So, going back to, and even within audit, here's another clue that I give auditors. No auditor that I've ever met has asked the audit area that they're auditing, they're engaged in how they hire their employees. I mean, that's not a typical procedure step that we do in audit. But if you want to get to auditing culture, ask them how they hire people in, ask them for their list of questions that they use. These are all things that, again, looking for tangible steps we can do to audit culture. These are things we can start asking. And I think, obviously the people do impact the culture quite a bit. And it's all about, what kind of people are you hiring? And, how do they feel about ethics? And did I even answer your question? I feel like I'm getting at it at a roundabout way.
Yeah, no, it's great.
I think, I think we've got to start asking, what are you expecting from your employees from an ethics and integrity? Because that should match what you want out of a culture, right? I mean, those two things should go hand in hand. Are you making sure their personal values match those on the wall of your organization? And I think there's some disconnect there that we could find.
I don't disagree with you. I've actually seen some of that disconnection myself. And it's interesting because you talk about it and then you get into the conversation of, well, it was a mistake. We'll allow it to happen. And if it's, and I'll be honest with you, Joe, I had one situation where it was a mistake and I was on the borderline as the chief auditor, whether it was a bad enough mistake or if it was forgivable mistake. I let the heart take over the brain. I said, okay, Bill, that's fine. I always use Bill as my name because there's all kinds of Bills out there and I get them in the mail all the time. So I figure, okay, what I did was ask him, why did you allow this to not be a serious situation? And why? And it shed some light on his view of ethical behavior. And I started to share that with my audit team. And I said, when you guys run into these kind of situations, ask the person, why did they do what they did? And I think you mentioned earlier in our conversation, you're after the why. I was always after the why. So I found out so much about, and it was a very enriching conversation. Are there other things that we can do as risk managers or auditors or managers to find out how people really feel about culture and not just the facade of, hey, we believe in ethics. I hear that in politicians all the time. And it doesn't work for me. I hate to say that, but in management, I've had some that I've known it and I felt it the minute they said it. I knew they were right, and others I'm kind of okay.
Yep. Let's go back to collect the data.
Okay.
Because I think it's the most powerful tool that we have in our toolbox. And I have been preaching about surveys for years. I mean, like 10 years. But even in our remote world right now, it is the best tool I think we have, because we're all, we're not seeing people face to face. I think one of the benefits is that people tend to hide behind the virtual environment sometimes, and they say what they really feel. I mean, honestly, I've even noticed this on presentations. You've got people, kind of saying things that I don't think they would stand up in a room and say, but they're comfortable sharing in our virtual world. And I think we need to take advantage of that as auditors.
Oh, you're sneaky. You're sneaky.
I do. I mean, I think we do. I think that, any surveys on culture, I've mentioned this, can be anonymous. And I truly believe that anywhere there's a problem, there is somebody willing to tell you about the problem. I go back to the Deepwater Horizon incident in 2010. Obviously lots happening off the shore off in Gulf of Mexico, off the shore of Louisiana. After the event, after the rig exploded, there was one gentleman that was asked, why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you say anything about the unsafe practices on the rig? Do you know what his answer was? No one asked. This is our opportunity. I know Trent Russell, right?
Yes,
He's got an audit podcast. It's so funny because he always sends a little thing that says, thank you for being on my show. Here was your one quote. Well, mine was
Yeah.
just ask, because I think this is our opportunity as auditors, as risk professionals, to ask from the front lines to the corner office how you're feeling. Start getting, get specific questions out there. Ask what ethical dilemma they have faced, because they've all faced one in their organization. And it takes a while to get people to respond to the surveys, but if you stick with it, and more importantly, if you show them you do something with the results of those surveys, they'll start answering them. And I think that they will start talking to you. So go back. I mean, really use this virtual environment as an opportunity, because someone out there is willing to tell you about something that's going on. And hey, if 5 people tell you, if 50 people tell you, that's a data point.
Yep, you're absolutely right. I love that, Joe. I love that. I always try to tell my auditors to ask questions and ask people. When I hired people, I would ask them 2 questions that a lot of people didn't ask. I asked them, do you have a hero? And if you do, who is it and why? Because I wanted to know why they were a hero. I got some really interesting answers there. And I've got some beautiful answers, and then some that were kind of flaky, but funny.
Yes.
But it was a good question for me to ask. And the other one I always ask was, have you ever been put in a situation that you had to think about making a decision that may have crossed a personal boundary? Walk me through that thought process.
Yeah.
I didn't really want to know the decision. I wanted to know the thought process.
Okay. I love that. I love those questions.
So I like those because they help me understand. And I liked your comment about people are more willing. I happen to be a person who says what I think, and what I do in public too. It gets me in trouble. When I do conference sessions, I've done it, and some people come and say, hey, that was great. That was great. Are you sure you wanted to say that? I said, too late now. So I do that often, but not everybody does. But you're right. If we ask people the question, they're willing to answer. Sometimes I find it's important to ask the right question, but at the right time. Do you find that when we're talking ethics, that there is probably a time that you don't want to ask ethical questions and you may want to save it for somewhere else? Or is this something that you should feel comfortable asking in front of 10 people, 5 people, 1 people? Never, often?
Yeah, I think, again, great question. This is me stalling. Let me think about this. I don't personally think there's a bad time to ask questions. However, I think it's super important if you're in an audit position, that you have a relationship built, that you have taken the time. And I'm sure that you and I would agree on this, that trust factor means a lot when it comes to getting information, any information, let alone ethics information. Yep. So, I mean, I would say, no, there's not a bad time, but can you just walk right into a Zoom call or into somebody's office and start asking them how they feel about culture? Probably not the best tactic. Build that relationship, build that rapport somehow. The good news with auditors and audit shops that I work with is that they've been working with a lot of the same people on audits and engagements for years. So hopefully you've got that background, you've met the person before. And so you have that. But, if you're new, think about that relationship building first would be my only piece of advice there.
Excellent. That's great advice. Let me ask your advice for our audience a little bit about, if I it came and it went so quickly. And it was a good one. It was a good one. It'll come back to me. Let's talk.
I know. Go back to your list of questions. I love your questions, by the way.
And we aren't asking hardly any of these because we're doing so much other stuff.
That's all right.
Let's talk a little bit about recognition of an ethics situation or ethical problem. Okay. It's good to see that, if, like we talked earlier, if someone keeps trying to influence you to change your rating of an audit report or change how you look at something, that could be a data point. I'm not saying on all instances it is, but it could be. Are there other things that we can recognize that are kind of behavioral or communicative that would be an indicator? It's something we should explore.
I think I want to go back to kind of the specifics of incentives. because I think, that's an area that's not explored enough within organizations. And if you look at, I have to bring up Wells Fargo, what happened at an organization that continues to happen there. It's about the sales incentives and the pressures, and maybe it's not even monetary. Maybe it's promotion capability or, performance management. So you can generalize it even, but I think that that's an area that goes under recognized personally, that we need to stop just recalculating the numbers, making sure people annual bonuses are paid out right. Why are people getting these bonuses? What are they doing? What are they incentivized to do? How are they incentivized to behave? So I'd say another 2-word favorite phrase of mine is look beyond. Look beyond the numbers, look beyond the products. What's the ethics behind that product? Have we thought about, why we have this data or what? I mean, it's looking beyond the surface of whatever it is to the ethics behind it, because typically there's ethics behind everything. And I don't think everybody makes that connection. How foundational ethics is to every product we give, every service, every phone call, customer service, what they're saying. I mean, there is ethics behind all of that. And I think we forget about that sometimes.
I love that whole answer to the question. It was great. And I love your communication style. And that reminded me of the question that I lost.
Oh, good.
You don't sound preachy. You don't sound like you're on a soapbox saying do. Auditors, sometimes when they want to make a point, they convert to, I am the pastor, I'm the preacher, you're going to do it my way.
Yes.
What could you tell us about communicating ethical concerns? Is there a style? Is there a technique? Is there something that we could do to not off-put people, but to actually engage them and bring them into the conversation?
Man, I have two answers kind of pop right into my head. Have you read the book Think Again by Adam Grant?
Yes.
Because he talks about, when you said preacher, the different modes of people, right? The politician, the preacher. He says we all need to be more like scientists. In my mind, I built an entire audit program called Rethinking Internal Audit based on that book.
Really?
I think, a lot of us we want to build data analytics, scientific, data scientist, all those terms really resonate with us. So again, be more like a scientist than a preacher or a politician. This is about the facts, and stick with those facts. Turn those facts into information, though, I think, and knowledge. You got to take those that fact and do something with it. That's another one of my pet peeves. I probably sound preachy and soapboxy now, but a lot of auditors, they are stuck in the find the problem business. They are not moving to the fix the problem business like they should be, or the solve the problem business. So do something with that, but be a scientist. The second thing I love, one of my interview questions that I always used to ask new internal audit staff was, how comfortable are you being a salesperson? And I used to get this look like, what? That has nothing to do with auditing. And I'm like, yes, it does. Because you have to be a really good salesperson. I'm not talking used car salesman here. I am talking influence people's decisions, influence people to take action. That is what we need to have. That's the skill. And so I used to kind of make them tell me how they've been a good salesperson in their life. And I think that was one of my unique interview questions. So that's my approach too. I feel like I love the fact that I am able to be a salesperson of ethics without selling anything. It is just like things we've talked about, explaining the why. Why is it important? Why is it foundational? And I think, we've just got to get auditors back to that, communicating appropriately, thinking about how they can truly influence change within their organizations.
That's very enlightening. I actually started my career in sales before I ever got into audit. And I told my staff this very same thing, Joe. I said, you guys got to be salespeople. We sell our business. It is a business. We sell what we do. I also love the fact that, and I linked this as you were talking, if we are going to focus more on resolution, then we need to be very ethical ourselves to provide ethical solutions.
Yes.
And so that helps us kind of recognize what is the right thing to do and right thing to say. We're running out of time, but I do have one more question that I want to ask you before we stop the recording. And again, thank you so much. I mean, I've been sitting here, I've been writing notes, and I'm thinking from a risk perspective, I could actually do a section in my risk assessment about ethics just from what you have answered and talked about today. I just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, bam, those are things I can look at.
Yes.
So to me, it seems really logical and appropriate that risk managers understand the ethical dynamics of business and cultures to be able to be the best risk managers they can be.
Yes.
Is that something that you would agree with? And is there one final thought you could share with us on what a risk manager could do to make sure they're along the right path, if I can say it that way?
Yes, absolutely. So I want to go back because I don't think I quite finished my thought on what total ethical auditing is to me. But the way you just asked that question, I think it could be total ethical risk management too. It really one and the same. The way I define it is a mindset, a mission, and execution process for internal auditors or risk managers to assess. We're going to change the word a little bit from audit to assess organizational leadership and culture. So here's the practice to me of total ethical anything. Think and plan like a fraud examiner. Think about that fraud triangle. Where could it happen? Risk managers need to do that. I mean, we are assessing the risk of fraud, essentially assessing the risk for unethical behavior. We've got to do that as risk managers. The second one, execute like an investigative journalist. Now that might apply more to auditors, but I love investigative journalists. Why? Because they focus on the high risk areas. And what are risk managers supposed to do? They need to hone their focus in. Like investigative journalists is, they're going to find the story, they're going to find the problem. So I think that applies to risk managers just as much as auditors. The last piece is truly my favorite though, mitigate like a coach. And I think a lot of things that risk managers and auditors don't do because they're in the second line and the third line, and don't get me started about the lines, but they don't help enough because they feel like it's crossing their line. They are not doing the advising that they need to do. They're not even having the right conversations with the first line that they need to be having. So I'd say, take that step. And really, this is not, I hate the word internal risk assessment that we do because it kind of, to me, alludes that an internal audit function does their own risk assessment just with themselves. Same with risk management. And I think the good thing about GRC tools is it brings all the lines together into the conversation. I think you'd agree with that, I'm sure, with your tool. And I think mitigating like a coach means having those conversations, getting in front of what are the risks, you think could happen? How could we train on this? How could we get in front of this problem? But it's just about that communication. It goes back to that communication. And so to me, it's that whole practice of you can build ethics in so many different ways. You just kind of have to step back and say, how can I build it into this, which I'm already doing? How can I build it into this that I'm already doing? And I think that that would be my advice. Think about where you can build it into your already process that you have.
Excellent advice. So that I don't put you on the limb out there by yourself, I will tell you, I wrote a blog not too long ago where I said we should eliminate the 3 lines of defense. It's a ridiculous, archaic issue. So we don't get me on that either, because I just go off. But
I love it. I love it. Yes, I actually answered that question very recently, and I'm sure you get it all the time. The independence question. How can we do this? How can we? I'm tired of that question. Anyway, we could have a whole nother session on that, I'm sure.
Now that you mentioned, what my answer is when I ask that question, because I'm asked that all the time. Right now, I'm doing a series of webinars for the Central Bank of Brunei. Ooh. And I've got that question about 3 or 4 times, and I answer it the same way all the time.
Let's hear it.
Independence is a character issue. It is not an organizational issue.
I love it.
It doesn't matter who I report to. If I have the character to do my job and independently make decisions, I want more information. Give me information. I do that through relationships, etc. So it's a character issue. It has nothing to do with org chart. And everyone, well, you know what it is anyway.
I know. Very similar. I say the same thing. We are all professionals.
Yep.
We can professionally do our job. And I'll leave it at that.
And the nice thing is neither one of us will get fired for what we just said.
That's
because
right.
we're our own boss.
Great.
Joe, thank you so much for this time with us. I know our audience is going to love what you've said. There are so many nuggets in this presentation or this conversation that I've written down. I know people will do that. So thank you for your time very, very much. Love having you here. Hopefully we can get together again sometime, but thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for having me.